Hello everybody, here's another video in the series that I did on repairing old Victorian window sashes. There's a lot of various techniques you might use when you try to repair things like this, and I'm going to show you a few that I had to do on this guy. I've done a couple of videos. This particular one, these sashes were in pretty tough shape, and it took a huge amount of work to replace one of the rails on them and rebuild the other one. And also I discovered it was infested with carpenter bees, which turned out to be an adventure all on its own. Check them out. So this is a second set of windows. I call these sashes 3 and 4. If we look closely at this guy on the left, bottom rail is pretty bad. I see evidence of a carpenter bee had started to bore a hole for a nest. And the paint over here is pretty poor. It's kind of funny how the little remnants of paint protected the wood. It's a little proud in those areas. And the rail here is pretty tough shape but salvageable. And up at the top, and generally it's in okay shape. So for this particular one, this lower piece looks salvageable. A little beat up over here, beat up over here. A bigger concern is how much of the wood I've lost on this outer part of the sash. We have both panes of glass, which is nice. There's a bore from a carpenter bee here and here, and this is some scat on the glass. Kind of gross. So I've been looking for some stock to reproduce this rail. I found 2 of these pieces here. These are balusters to an exterior porch. They're made of cedar. They should be very weather resistant. They're both straight as can be. Got my fancy schmancy screwdriver. Well, it's pretty sharp. Try to get the chip breaker 16 32nd millimeter, half a millimeter, those types of dimensions. And I need the joint to be waterproof, so I got 2 options. One would be epoxy, but I think I'm going to go with Titebond 3 here. This softwood is really soaking up the adhesive. I discovered that this window actually isn't square in this direction, and I think to make cutting the glass a little easier, I'm going to try to make it square, but I'll have to taper the bottom to be a little thinner on this end. It's kind of hard to know exactly because this piece is so eroded, you don't really know how much material was originally here. And before I start to cut them, I figured I'd do a trial and cut the mortise out if it fits in there the way I think. I don't have a tenoning jig, but I did cobble together this setup out of my sliding tall fence. Well, I cut the 2 mortises and they fit in the tenons. It's lining up pretty square. It's not perfect, but I think it was probably the way the window's always been. I need to trim the bottom so it doesn't quite line up, and I need to cut a dado. It's curious, the other sashes had 2 screws at the top holding this joint together, where this pair of sashes has 1 screw and 1 cut nail. The bottom of the sash is milled at an angle. Put it like that. Comes out around 10 degrees. I need to trim about 1/4 inch off of this end and only 1/8 of an inch off of this end. I've set up a 6-foot straight edge on my table saw, and if I simply can kick out this end by 1/4 of an inch, I'll cut 1/4 of an inch more off of this end than this end, which will be riding against the fence. So I have my blade tipped approximately the correct angle, and I've got a 1/4 inch spacer just temporarily taped out here. So I like the way this is coming together. This edge lines up with that corner. This corner over here lines up pretty well. I'm pretty square. The dado in here seems to be the right height. On the lower part of the stiles, they're pretty heavily worn, but I got a real 3-dimensional effect going on. I think I'm going to just fill it after I glue it. And this 3-dimensional effect over here will give it a little toothiness for the filler to adhere to. This is 12-hour epoxy. And I'm going to tint it, put in a little dab of the dye on the end of the toothpick. So this new piece that I created is sitting a little proud. I think it's the proper thickness, but what I'm inclined to do is just take a little bit off of this face to get it a little closer to the old. And I'm going to use my lovely number 5. This is a Stanley 4-square that I did a series of videos on. God, isn't she a beauty, huh? think that's pretty good. Well, I forgot to hit record, but I used my elevated featherboard. Did a video on that. You want to check it out? To rip a 5/16 inch sliver off of this piece of poplar. So just to give a quick update, there were giant voids down here. On this side I filled it with little bits of wood and then a generous dose of epoxy. Over here I've got a generous dose of epoxy, and it's coming together quite well. Okay, just an update. I have filled everything in. I think I've entombed a couple of carpenter bees. Took the time to coat the inside of where the window is going to go with boiled linseed oil, and we're going to put an oil-based primer, which is what I want. And it says interior and exterior, which is important in this case. These pieces of glass don't quite fit. If I zoom in on it, you can see how non-straight these arches are. So I'm using my diamond stone to remove some of the glass. Well, it took about 5 minutes of grinding on the diamond plate to get this to fit. It's kind of funny, if you need a piece of glass cut like this, this is where you would go to a glass place. They have powered diamond stone wheels. That's why I need to cut a piece for this panel here. I'm not even going to try to do it in glass. I can use the other pane of glass for the other sash as a template for this one. It seems to fit pretty good. It seems a little tight over here, but I'm definitely got a problem over here. I'm going to need to add almost a 1/2 inch. Well, I was trying to get this piece to fit the way I wanted, and I ended up breaking the corner off. So mad at myself, I was being stupid. So I had to run out and get a replacement piece. So to cut the new piece, I'm actually going to check and see if I actually have a right angle. It'd be nice if I had 2 right angles. And actually, this one's not bad. These sashes are handmade. So I can line up in this corner and line up a steel straight edge, and with a Sharpie draw a line, and then I can freehand a line along that edge. This line appears to be parallel to the edge, so I can use my fence on the table saw. I find if you go relatively slow, not that big of a deal to cut plexiglass on the table saw. When cutting brittle materials, you have to be careful as you reach the end of your cut. A large piece of it can break off. Flip it around and get a reasonable cut on both sides that meet in the middle. And I'm using the push blocks that I made for my jointer. Did a video on that if you want to check it out. There's a mark down here on my table saw that lines up with the blade, so I can visually sight down and get pretty close to hitting this line. I'm going to use to make the first cut, and then we'll creep up on it. With the blade low on the table saw, you can actually cut a moderate curve. And I'm going to go give it a test fit. And it fits. Gee whiz. First cut, no kidding. Who'd have thought that would happen? It's a good idea to keep the plastic film on as long as you can, just to protect the plastic, because it's not a very hard material. It takes some time to clean up the old glass. And I'm obviously being mindful not to break it. That would be bad. And there it is, cleaned up. Took it to the sink, gave it a good soap and water bath to get most of the dirt off it, and a little bit of Windex to get some of the greasy spots off. You get a little bit on the knife, get it onto the lip, and you want to get a nice little bed all the way around the lip for the glass to sit on, so that the glass isn't sitting directly on the wood. It helps seals it and cushion it. Take the glass, make sure I'm orienting it the right way, setting it in, and gently pushing it down, and you can see the glazing compound squeezing on the back side. I still have 3 of the original glazing points left, and to install them you line them up and put a putty knife against it. Very carefully just push it into the wood, and there you have it. There's about 1/8 of an inch sticking out. You don't want them to stick out any more than you really need, because when you go to put the glazing on, you don't want the glazing point to be sticking out beyond the glazing, and generally you want the glazing to be as low profile as you can get it. This is what the modern glazing points look like. They have a little lip on them to help you push them into the wood. However, this tail that sticks out is a little large, so I like to nip off these backside corners a little bit. So I find you can take a pair of dikes And it looks like that, which is a little bit better to use. So with that said, I'm going to take some of the putty, just kind of get it in there. Then the technique is you draw the knife slowly and it'll glide over the compound and kind of extrude it a little bit as it does so. But more importantly, it won't tear it. So as I'm going this way, I'm holding the far edge of the putty knife flat on the glass. Again, it's sort of acting as a squeegee, and you'll see I'm at a very gentle angle to get a good generous bead of the glazing compound up there. And on the sides, so here I'm at an angle like this. When I do the sides, I can be at a higher angle because these aren't really shedding water. Well, and here is a close-up of the glazing. Looking pretty good. Just gotta let it firm up a little bit. I have to prime it with an oil-based primer, and then we can paint it up. Well, and here is this one with a coat of oil-based primer on it. You need the oil-based paint to go on the oil-laden glazing compound. Latex paint won't stick to it at all. When I removed the two sashes, they were held in by these cleats. These are made of wood and bent, and I managed to get this one out in one piece, give you an idea. And this one, not so much so. So I'm going to have to make another one. I have this piece of scrap PVC. It's about the right dimensions, and it'll be very easy to bend this compared to bending a piece of wood. So it's just a matter of cutting it to length, and there's saw marks on both sides. I'll have to remove those with a smoothing plane. So this is the interior of the second set of curved sashes. They're ready to be installed. This here is the new piece that I put in. I didn't have any brown paint, so I had to use some water-based brown stain. Couple coats to get it dark, and the same thing over here. I stained the areas where the wood sort of taken it on the chin, and over here is a close-up of the wood filler. I think it blends in pretty good. Again, if this were in somebody's living room, you'd spend a little more time making it look a little more perfect. It's going to be in an attic. This looks pretty good. And here of course is the exterior side, and they came out pretty good. Filled, primed, sealed, painted. And here is the second set. Curved sashes installed. Well, that's what I got for this, guys. And as always, thanks for coming by. If you learned something here, please like, subscribe, let me know what you think, and keep your eyes out for the next one.